Dad and I had planned the hike for months, a stretch of the Appalachian Trail we hadn't finished the year before. He'd been talking about it since winter, sketching routes, checking weather, that sort of thing. But not 30 minutes in, he went down. 1 second he was helping a younger hiker over a wet rock. The next his boot slipped and his foot twisted with a sound I'll never forget, like a stick snapping under tension. He tried to play it off, said he'd be fine, but I could tell from the way he winced that he wasn't walking another 5 miles, let alone 30. He insisted I keep going. Said, "You've been needing this, son. You finish it for both of us." I should have turned back with him, but I didn't. Maybe pride, maybe stupidity. Probably both. Once he limped back down toward the ranger station, I headed deeper into the trail alone. The farther I went, the less it felt like the places we'd hiked before. The main path was fine, clear enough, even marked, but I'd always been drawn to the forgotten cuts that snake off the main route like veins. There's an old one out there, barely used anymore. Locals talk about it like a ghost road. No signage, no maintenance, no reason to go there unless you're half crazy. I don't know what pushed me to take it. Maybe I just wanted quiet. Maybe I wanted to see something raw and untouched. Whatever it was, I turned onto that overgrown path around 5 in the evening when the sun started dropping behind the ridges. The first 2 days were perfect. Warm afternoons, cool nights, birds, the wind through the trees, the kind of solitude that resets you. I built small fires, cooked freeze-dried meals, and thought about nothing for the first time in months. But on the 3rd day, heading down the other side of the mountain, everything shifted. About halfway down I saw it, a shirt, ripped to hell, smeared with something dark hanging from a branch. It wasn't old either. The fabric still had color like it hadn't been there long. Blood or mud, I couldn't tell at first. I told myself animals drag stuff into weird places all the time. But the way it was hung, arms spread caught neatly between 2 branches, it looked placed. I stood there longer than I should have, listening. Nothing but wind. Still, my gut tightened. I moved on, faster this time, scanning both sides of the trail. By dusk, I'd found a decent flat patch to camp. Low brush, a few boulders, a small stream nearby. I set up quick, ate, and tried to shake off the weirdness. The woods can play tricks when you're alone too long, but when I wandered a few yards from camp to stretch my legs, I noticed something odd about one of the trees. It had fresh knife marks, shallow slashes near the base. When I bent to look closer, the sunlight caught on something between that tree and the next, a faint shimmer. I squinted, crouched lower, and there it was. A wire, thin and tight, strung ankle-high. My stomach went cold. I followed it with my eyes until I lost it in the leaves. Someone had set a tripwire right off the trail. I cut it loose immediately, hands shaking a bit more than I'd like to admit, and backed away. I didn't see a snare or pit, but that didn't make it better. It meant whoever put it there might still be around. I went back to camp ready to pack up and move. Then I froze. The tent flap hung open. I know I zipped that thing. I always do. My pack was inside, but my phone, gone. That was the moment fear really landed. Not the quick kind that spikes and fades, but the deep, crawling kind that sits in your chest. Somebody had walked into my camp while I was 10 yards away and took something from right under my nose. No sound, no warning, nothing. I grabbed my gun from my pack and stood still for a long time listening. The woods felt alive but wrong, like they were holding their breath with me. Nothing moved. I tore down camp fast and started moving downhill. I didn't care about the hour. I just needed distance between me and that spot. The light bled out fast, and soon I was walking by headlamp, every snap of a twig punching through me. At some point, I stopped to eat and catch my breath. Silence. Not a frog, not a bird, nothing. I must have nodded off for a bit because I remember jerking awake to the faintest rustle, like something brushing canvas. I flicked on my light, nothing. Convinced I'd imagined it, I sat there until dawn painted the sky gray. When I stepped out, something glinted near the same mossy tree where I'd taken a leak in the night. Another damn wire, this one tighter, cleaner, and leading upward. I traced it with my eyes and saw what it connected to, a metal container hanging from a branch swaying slightly in the breeze. My first thought was water. Then the smell hit me, sharp, chemical, like a battery shop. Whoever did this had rigged that thing to dump acid on whoever tripped the line. I backed away slow, scanning the trees. That's when I saw him. Movement. Just enough to catch in my peripheral vision. A figure half hidden behind a trunk, maybe 50 feet out. Not moving toward me, just watching. My body acted before my mind did. I raised my gun, shouted something like, "The hell do you want?" But the second I did, he bolted. I barely caught a shape. Tall, dark clothes, maybe a hood or hat. I fired once, then twice into the direction he ran, the sound exploding through the trees. Bird shot into the air. Then nothing again. Just me, shaking, heart hammering so hard I thought it'd crack my ribs. I packed what I could grab and got the hell out. Every few steps I looked back, half expecting him to appear again. The trail seemed longer than before. Endless switchbacks and shadows that all looked like people. It took hours, but I finally hit the main path again. My legs were jelly, my throat dry as dust. When I saw a family coming toward me, mom, dad, 2 kids, it almost made me cry. I told them everything, voice cracking like some lunatic. They let me use their phone to call for help. Rangers and police came later, combed the place. They found my tent, that acid container, and the wire I'd cut. The stuff inside was confirmed as battery acid, rigged with a nail and lever system. Crude but deadly. They never found the guy. That was 7 years ago. I still hike sometimes, but never alone and never off the main trail. There were 4 of us that weekend. Me, Daniel, Heather, and Nate. We'd been talking all summer about hiking the High Peaks Loop, and Marcy Dam was supposed to be our base camp for 2 nights before moving deeper toward Avalanche Lake. It's a beautiful spot, usually buzzing with hikers, but we'd picked a late August weekday thinking it'd be quieter. Maybe that was our mistake. We started early Friday morning from the Adirondack Lodge trailhead. The air was crisp, the kind that bites your lungs a little, but the forest was alive. Wet moss, the smell of pine, and that distant hum of the river running parallel to the trail. It felt like the perfect escape from work. Noise and people. About 3 miles in, we reached Marcy Dam, a broad wooden bridge crossing the cold water below, and found a perfect clearing just past the tree line. Someone else had already pitched a gray tent nearby about 50 feet away. It was small, old, maybe military surplus, but we figured it belonged to a solo hiker. Nothing unusual. We set up camp, made a fire, and relaxed while the sun dipped behind the pines. I remember saying something like, "I hope whoever's in that gray tent doesn't mind neighbors." Daniel laughed. "Hey, the woods are big enough for all of us." That night, everything changed. It was just past 9 when we heard him. A voice called out from the dark, calm, deep, and oddly cheerful. "Evening, folks." We turned and a man stepped out from the shadows between the trees. He wore a red flannel shirt, old jeans, and carried a weathered rucksack. His hair was long and matted, his beard rough and patchy. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Didn't mean to startle you," he said, raising a hand. "Was just passing by. Saw your fire." Heather was the first to answer. "That's okay. You camping nearby?" The man nodded toward the gray tent. "That's me. Been here a couple nights. Peaceful out here." He stared at the flames, then at each of us one by one. His eyes lingered on me a little too long. "You folks alone out here?" Something in his tone made my stomach tighten. It wasn't curiosity. It was calculation. Daniel tried to play it cool.
"Just the 4 of us."
You, hiking too?" The man smiled again, wider this time. "Sort of, just looking around. People forget how quiet it can get out here. Nobody around for miles." Heather gave a polite laugh, but I could feel the unease spreading through the group. Nate busied himself with the fire, pretending not to notice the way the man kept glancing toward our packs. Then he asked, Anyone expecting you? Like, if you don't come back right away? The question hung in the air like a blade. Nobody spoke for a moment. I finally muttered, "Our families know we're here." We texted before we lost service. He nodded, his smile twitching slightly. "Good, that's smart. You never know who you'll run into out here." There was something in the way he said "you never know," like it was meant to mean the opposite. After another minute of tense small talk, Daniel said, "We're actually turning in soon, man. Early hike tomorrow." The stranger nodded again, then turned and disappeared back toward the gray tent without another word. I watched him vanish into the black, the sound of his footsteps fading. Heather whispered, "That was weird as hell." "Yeah," Nate muttered. Why'd he ask if anyone was expecting us? We all agreed it was off, but we tried to laugh it off, telling ourselves he was just some lonely drifter, maybe a little too friendly. Still, none of us slept easy that night. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of leaves crunching outside my tent. Slow, deliberate steps. I froze. My flashlight was beside my sleeping bag, but I didn't dare turn it on. The steps circled our tents. Once, then again. Every few seconds they'd stop, like whoever it was listening. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then came the sound of something brushing against the tent wall. A faint rasping drag. "Oh God," I whispered to myself, barely breathing. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the sound stopped. Silence, heavy and absolute. When I finally got the nerve to peek outside, my light caught nothing but trees and fog. The man's gray tent stood dark and still. By morning, things were off. Our food bag, which we'd tied up in a tree overnight, was half untied. The fire pit was scattered, and one of our camp chairs was missing. Nate swore he'd heard something at dawn, like whispering or soft laughter, but he couldn't tell where it came from. We walked over to the man's tent. The flap hung open, the inside completely empty. No gear, no sleeping bag, no footprints leading away. It looked like it had just been dropped there and forgotten. Heather muttered, "What the hell?" Daniel called out, "Hello? You out here?" No answer. Just the wind through the pines and the distant rush of the river. We packed up fast and hiked down toward the ranger station at the lodge. The ranger on duty listened quietly, then frowned when we described the man. "Red flannel, scruffy beard, gray tent," he said, flipping through his permit log. Nobody by that description checked in. Everyone camping in that zone's accounted for. That made my skin crawl. "So who was he?" The ranger shrugged. "Hard to say. We've had a few reports of thefts up near Avalanche Pass. Hikers missing gear, food, even wallets. Could be someone squatting without a permit. You did the right thing leaving." We drove straight to Lake Placid to get cell service, stopped at a gas station to grab snacks and breathe for a minute. The clerk, an older woman, overheard us talking and froze. "Wait," she said, coming closer. "You saw a guy in a red flannel camping near Marcy Dam?" We nodded. Her face went pale. "He's been coming around here, stealing food and gas, sometimes sleeping behind the dumpsters. The cops tried to catch him last week, but he disappears into the woods every time." I remember just standing there, feeling the blood drain from my face. We left that same hour, too shaken to even look back toward the mountains. That night, at a cheap motel off Route 73, I couldn't sleep. Every time a floorboard creaked or a car passed outside, I'd flinch. At one point, around 2 a.m., I swore I heard someone outside the window. When I pulled the curtain back, I saw nothing. But the way the glass fogged up for a second made my chest tighten. The next morning, I checked the news. Nothing about arrests or missing hikers. Nothing about a man in a red flannel. It was like he didn't exist. Sometimes I think about how he asked, "Anyone expecting you?" and wonder what he would have done if I'd said no. A few weeks later, Daniel texted a photo from a hiking group forum. Someone had posted a picture of an abandoned gray tent deep in the woods near Marcy Dam. Same model, same torn flap. The caption read, "Found this last week. No sign of the owner. Anyone know whose this is?" Nobody ever answered. Now whenever I pass a trailhead or see the Adirondack peaks in the distance, I get that same creeping dread. Oh my God, he knew exactly what he was doing out there, and I still don't think he ever left those woods. I went out there to be alone. That was the whole point. No traffic, no notifications, no city breathing down my neck. Just me, a tent in the deep green silence of Pennsylvania's Allegheny National Forest. I'd been working remote for too long, losing track of days, running on coffee and noise. So when Friday came, I threw my pack into the back of my Jeep, left my phone in airplane mode, and drove north until the road turned to gravel and the map turned to blank green. It was early October, quiet, cool, and sharp. The kind of air that smelled of pine sap and rain-soaked earth. I parked near an old service gate along Forest Road 262, hoisted my pack and followed an unmarked trail that wound downhill between hemlocks. I remember thinking how peaceful it felt, like the forest swallowed all the noise of the world. No engines, no voices, just the slow groan of branches and the distant caw of a raven. I hiked nearly 4 miles in before I picked a flat stretch near a small creek to set up camp. The leaves were turning bronze and red, floating past like dying embers. I pitched my tent, lit a small fire, and just sat there listening to the night build around me. Somewhere far off, an owl cried. A breeze moved through the trees like something alive. By morning, I felt clearer than I had in months. I made oatmeal on the stove and decided to explore the ridge above camp. The map on my phone showed no trails that direction, just contour lines and dense woods. Perfect. I wanted to walk somewhere that felt untouched. The climb was steep, the kind that makes your lungs sting. I passed moss-choked boulders, old deer tracks, and fallen birch trees slick with fungus. After about an hour, I crested the ridge and found it, an old logging path nearly gone beneath brush. Following it, I saw something strange about 50 yards ahead, a dark shape tucked between the trees. At first, I thought it was another tent, or maybe a hunting shack. But as I got closer, I saw it was a small cabin. The roof sagged, the door hung crooked, and vines crawled up one wall like fingers. The windows were filmed over with grime. It looked like no one had been there in decades. I don't know why I went closer. Curiosity, I guess. The forest does that, makes you want to know its secrets. The door was half open, squealing when I pushed it. The smell hit me first, damp rot, mold, and something else underneath like old sweat. Dust drifted in the light, cutting through a crack in the roof. Inside were remnants of furniture, a busted chair, a rusted stove, and a table covered in mouse droppings. And then I saw the claw marks. They were deep, gouged into the wooden frame beside the door, 4 slashes descending at an angle. Not animal scratches, too wide, too deliberate. My first thought was bear, but bears don't mark walls like that. Something about it made my stomach turn cold. I moved farther inside. On the wall above the table, pinned beneath a knife, was a torn map, dated 1989, yellowed and brittle. The edges were singed. I leaned close, brushing off the dust when I heard it. Footsteps, not an animal shuffle, not the random creak of wood. Slow, deliberate, crunching over leaves outside. I froze, heart hammering. My flashlight was still clipped to my belt. I switched it off, crouched behind the table, and waited. The footsteps circled the cabin, dragging slightly. I could hear breathing, raspy, uneven, like someone with a chest cold. Then the door creaked just an inch. My pulse went wild. A man stepped inside. He wasn't a hiker. He wasn't anyone I'd ever want to meet out there. His beard was wild, patchy, his face sunburned and filthy. His clothes were torn, layered, bits of old jackets and flannel tied with rope. His eyes. God, his eyes looked hollow, like he hadn't slept in years. He sniffed the air, slow and animal-like. Then he muttered something low, almost to himself. Mine. This is mine. I stayed still, barely breathing. He moved around the room, dragging his fingers along the walls, mumbling broken phrases. Gone long time. They took it. They took it all. I thought maybe he hadn't seen me. Then he turned, eyes locking on the corner where I hid. For a second, we just stared at each other. His mouth twitched, forming words I couldn't make out. Then he lunged. I stumbled backward, kicking the chair aside as he came at me with a rusted hatchet. I threw up my arm and the blade clipped my sleeve, tearing fabric. I grabbed the table and shoved it forward, slamming him back against the wall. He grunted, a wet, guttural sound, and swung again, missing by inches. "Get out," he bellowed. "You don't belong here." I tripped, hit the floor, scrambled for the flashlight, and swung it like a club. The metal connected with his jaw with a crack. He howled, spitting blood, then came at me again. Something primal took over. I drove my boot into his knee, felt it buckle, and pushed myself upright. I didn't think. I just ran. Bursting through the door, I tore down the hill, branches whipping my face. Behind me, I heard him screaming, incoherent words mixing with animal sounds. I didn't look back. I just kept running until the cabin disappeared behind the trees. By the time I reached my camp, my lungs were burning. I grabbed my pack, left the tent standing, and sprinted toward the main forest road. It took me nearly 2 hours to find it. I didn't stop until I saw the ranger station. The rangers thought I was delirious. I must have looked it, mud smeared across my face, shirt torn, shaking like hell. I told them everything, the cabin, the man, the attack. They called the sheriff's office, and by late afternoon, 2 deputies agreed to check it out. I rode with them back along the forest road, heart pounding the whole way. When we finally hiked up that ridge together, I half expected to see the man waiting there. But when we reached the cabin, it looked wrong. It was stripped clean. The knife and map were gone. The broken furniture gone. Even the claw-marked frame had been pried out. Only my flashlight lay in the dirt outside, cracked and muddy. The deputies exchanged looks. One said maybe I'd stumbled onto an old squatter's place and scared him off. Another said maybe I imagined more of it than I thought. But when they searched the area around the ridge, they found something else. Boot prints, fresh, leading deeper into the forest. They followed the tracks for nearly a mile before losing them in the undergrowth. By then, the light was dying. They said we'd come back with dogs the next morning. I didn't sleep that night. I stayed at the ranger cabin, staring out at the trees swaying under moonlight. Every time the wind shifted, I thought I heard him breathing out there. The next afternoon, a ranger named Keller came by. He looked pale when he told me what they'd found. About 2 miles from where the cabin had been, down by a small ravine, they discovered a tarp shelter. Green, half camouflaged with branches. Inside were canned goods, jerky, and bottled water with store labels only a few weeks old. Someone had been living there, but the man was gone. No hatchet, no footprints leading away. Just that crude shelter and a rotting sleeping bag. I left Allegheny the next morning. I didn't even bother taking the tent I'd left behind. I drove until the forest was nothing but a blur in the rearview mirror. It's been too long now. I keep thinking about the claw marks. About the way he said, "mine." I tell myself he's still out there, living off the grid, surviving off the land, maybe watching hikers from the trees.